from the Arabian Peninsula, and a warm welcome to everyone. Okay. Good afternoon from the Arabian Peninsula, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us today. My name is Ibrahim Jalal, non-resident at Carnegie, and I'm pleased to moderate this timely panel discussion hosted by the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center, titled New Calculus in Yemen, U.S. Operations, Regional Alignments, and the Prospects for Peace. Yemen stands at a volatile and deeply consequential crossroads. Recent U.S. military airstrikes, ongoing regional realignments, and President Trump's anticipated visit to the Gulf come at an important moment of shifting strategic calculus in the region. At the same time, sustained Houthi disruptions to maritime security in the Red Sea, continued cross-border attacks as far as Israel, have widened the conflict's regional footprint, which raises stakes for both escalation and de-escalation dynamics in Yemen. Compounding these dynamics, there is a growing chatter about a potential ground offensive in Yemen, which, if launched, could upend fragile balances and change the internal military balances and the pathways for sustainable peace in Yemen. Today's discussion brings together four highly regarded voices to help us unpack this evolving landscape. From U.S. strategic posture and Saudi policy to internal political and military dynamics in Yemen, and the prospects for an inclusive, sustainable peace in Yemen itself. First of all, I'd like to welcome Dr. Michael Knights, who's Jill and Jay Bernstein Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Dr. Knights is the leading expert in the military and security affairs of Iraq, Iran, Yemen, and the Gulf states. He holds a doctorate from King's College London. Second of all, Mr. Barak Shayban, who is an associate fellow with the Royal United Services Institute and a consultant with the Reprieve, a British Yemeni political analyst with deep field experience. Mr. Barak was a delegate at Yemen's National Dialogue Conference in 2013 and has worked extensively on counterterrorism policies and the impact of US and regional strategies. Third of all, we have Dr. Hisham Al-Ghannam, a non-resident scholar at Carnegie Middle East Center, and the Director General for the Strategic Studies and National Security Programs at United Arab University. Saudi political scientists, Dr. Al-Ghannam focuses on regional security, Gulf political economy, and military security affairs, but also China-Gulf relations. He earned his PhD from the University of Exeter and had multiple fellowships with leading institutions. And finally, we have Ms. Yasmin Al-Iryani, the co-executive director for knowledge production at the Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies, a peace-building strategist and a PhD candidate. She leads the Sana'a Center's knowledge production and focuses on conflict resolution, peace tech, and participatory methods in conflict settings. Welcome all with all of us today. Quickly, a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be made available through the Carnegie Middle East Center's platform following the event. We encourage your engagement. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit questions at any time. If you would like to share your details in terms of name and affiliation with the question, please do so. We'll have about 7 to 10 minutes per each speaker, and we'll have this in a conversational format to keep it dynamic. Welcome again. Dr. Mike, would love to begin with you to this discussion. The United States under President Trump reprioritized the Red Sea security file as among the top strategic issues, seemingly, given that the freedom of navigation has been under threat for about 18 months or so. Could you tell us how do you interpret the latest US operation in Yemen under President Trump compared to Biden's quote-unquote inconsistent policy towards Yemen, the Houthis, and the region? How does it differ, its scopes, its objectives, and does it pave the way for anything truly strategic, having seen sustained Houthi attacks into Israel, but also in the Red Sea domain?
Well, thanks very much for having me. This is a really great panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing what my colleagues say after I get finished. I'm going to learn a lot. I don't think what we're looking at is a very carefully thought out operation. It seems that it appeared out of nowhere. about the same time as the Gaza ceasefire broke down, it's very unclear what the objectives are. Because if the objectives are to stop the Houthis from attacking international shipping, the Houthis were not attacking international shipping before the US escalation started in mid-March. So there's obviously another factor at play here. It may be the very regular Houthi shoot downs of US drones before mid-March, which have only got worse since mid-March. It could be related to the pressure play on Iran to do with returning to nuclear negotiations. But a lot of things have got mixed together in this military operation. It's happening at the same time as a major US effort to pressure the Iranians to come to the nuclear table and make concessions. It's using the same military asset set as those Iranian, as the sort of the regional deployment that is putting pressure on Iran. It's very hard to disentangle it from other things that are happening. I think US Central Command is using the opportunity to get some things done that it has wanted to do for a while, which is to reduce the level of Houthi threat, both to maritime shipping, but also to regional states, including Israel and the Gulf states. I think that, it's definitely very different from any previous US administration, being that we've had over 1,000 strikes now in almost 70 waves of US attacks in the last 51 days. That's very different from the Biden administration's 1 day of striking each month within Yemen, plus defensive actions on the sea. So this is a massive escalation. It's also affected, of course, critical infrastructure inside Yemen, such as the ports of Hodeida and Ras Isa. It's also brought the return of leadership targeting within Yemeni cities, which we last saw under the Gulf Coalition prior to 2019, which was quite controversial at the time. And as your other panel members are going to note, it's really striking the way when Saudi Arabia and the UAE did some of these things, they were crucified by US Congress and media. And now the US is doing them. There's absolutely zero concern about the fact that these measures are being taken. It's clear that when the US agreed to put the foreign terrorist organization designation back on the Houthis, they created a lot of carve-outs. For instance, initially they didn't sanction fuel shipments to the Houthis. And they did a number of other carve-outs to leave room for escalation, but also to leave room for Saudi Arabia to continue peace negotiations with the Houthis. Those carve-outs are now closing one by one as the US gets deeper into this conflict with the Houthis with no apparent end point. This is why people are increasingly thinking about a ground offensive, or at least talking about it or threatening it. And that's something that I can talk about a little bit later or now if you need.
Yes, thank you very much. You mentioned a very number of important, factors at play, the regional landscape and Saudi-Iranian relationships and the way to the calculus at a moment when the axis of resistance is in a state of decline from Syria to Lebanon. And in Yemen, there appears to be a Yemen moment. In 2023, when this first started, the Yemeni government was under immense pressure to use the moment, thinking that this moment of redefinition of the Houthis as possibly a global terrorist group that threatens international peace, trade, and security, which is the way they framed it, that this is not going to last long. It lasted more than anybody expected. We're now in May 2025, and it seems that the window of opportunity keeps opening, but no one is using it. Many argue that the Stockholm Agreement was strategic miscalculation in 2018. In hindsight, or objectively, if we're looking to the back, in a way that it underestimated the intensity of threat and contributed to this evolving landscape and the blockage that we saw for Bab al-Mandab. What do you think needs to happen if we want to address the freedom of navigation, restoring commercial traffic to the Red Sea, and ensuring that Yemen stays or actually restores its sources of stability that reflect on this regional order.
So I was a big supporter of the Hodeida offensive in 2017, 2018, and I'm really sad that the United States, the UN, and others stopped that offensive, because it had the ability, had the potential to change the nature of the campaign and the nature of the Yemen war and actually bring the Houthis to the negotiating table. They only respect one thing, which is the potential they could lose terrain, particularly their coastline, and control of populations and resources. Nothing else matters. Bombing them, you can do that for months. The US could keep doing it for another 2-3 years. It wouldn't matter. Loss of terrain is what they fear, which is why people are thinking about threatening a ground offensive. At the moment, I'm finishing off a third book in my trilogy on the Yemen war that looks specifically at the battle for the Red Sea and the build up to the eventually the Stockholm agreement in late 2018. There is only one way really to get the Houthis to the negotiating table, and that is to threaten them with a ground offensive that cuts off their access to the Red Sea and completely isolates them. Or to actually do that and seize the Red Sea coast and push their anti-shipping capabilities right back to the mountain ranges, which does make them much, much less effective. So whether you're only threatening a ground offensive, whether you're actually going to do it, these are both critical components of an end game, at least to prevent the Houthis from doing anti-shipping attacks and maybe even to bring them to the Saudi-led negotiations with more realistic, with a sense of realism and more flexibility. So it's a rerun of what happened with the Hodeida offensive in 2018. The question is, can it be done now without UAE forces on the ground? They were critical to helping the Yemeni forces to advance around Hodeida, although they were not doing all the fighting for the Yemenis, not at all. In fact, at Hodeida, the Yemeni forces did more of the fighting on their own than ever before. There was a lighter Emirati footprint, and Emirati air power and Saudi air power could not be used inside the city of Hodeida. So it was actually Yemeni forces doing the fighting. Now, a couple of years later, with more training, more equipment, and in fact with US air power overhead, it could even be more effective than it was back then. And the Houthis began to actually withdraw from the Hodeida area when they sensed that they were going to face a determined ground assault. It was only the UN Stockholm Agreement that allowed the Houthis to return into Hodeida city and port. They had already left. So, it's quite possible that we could see a ground offensive, but it requires ultimately Saudi and Emirati backing as well as American support. I was just in the Gulf for a number of weeks talking to key Yemeni military commanders, and they had not received a go-ahead for any kind of offensive at this time. So that decision is still to be made. Over.
Thank you very much. That really captures some of the dynamics and sort of considerations for why an offensive might be or might not be as important. You said you were in the Gulf catching up with, military commanders. Just did you feel a sense of changing regional calculus on the operation, if you happen to be in the UAE or Saudi Arabia generally? Just as a question before I move to Boya.
Yeah, I think there's a ground offensive could be worked up quite quickly, and it could be coordinated with the Americans very quickly. And it doesn't have to be a very good ground offensive, because all it needs to do is to threaten the Houthis so that they start to activate ground forces, reserves, move and communicate more frequently. And that allows US air power to hit them much more effectively. This is what we did against the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. The Iraqi forces and the Kurdish forces were not particularly effective when they attacked, but what they did was to make the Islamic State easier to target from the air, because the Islamic State had to maneuver and mobilize to react to a ground offensive. So it's quite doable. I don't think that order has been given yet. Nowhere near close. I mean, I wasn't getting the sense that anybody was ready. Well, they had been asked to do a ground offensive. Nobody had been asked.
Thank you very much. Moving into Bara, Mike touched on an important point that the Yemeni forces actually led the offensive for Hodeida. In fact, just a few days ago, Sheikh Abdurrahman Hujay, one of the most notable commanders for the Tehama resistance, which fought side by side with the Giants Brigades, and then the backing of the emerging national resistance at the time after Tariq Saleh defection from Sana'a. The forces have been improving in terms of training, much more than they were in the past after the reintegration under the joint forces. And they have sort of been attempting to develop as a more formidable force on the ground, including by acquiring new arms over the past couple of years. And with this changing calculus and enduring threats to the Red Sea, but also realizing potentially the miscalculation of the Stockholm stigma in 2018, what are now, from your perspective, the internal drivers to continue the unfinished business in Yemen? Because for many Yemenis, the war has been an unfinished business, but the world might have seemed to want at some point to move on. And Houthi calculus and most notably behaviors did give everyone possibly a reality check. What are the internal and external drivers now for a potential offensive? Can these internal and external interests be harmonized if they were to be achieved? Because many dismiss the connection between the Red Sea crisis and the internal sources of stability or destability that reflect actually beyond Yemen's borders. Over to you, Bara, to hear your thoughts on the drivers.
Yeah, Ibrahim. The reality is, from the beginning, really, of the war in Yemen, there has been a huge gap between the what Yemenis approach as a sustainable peace and what do they see as a reality check in terms of how things should proceed with the Houthis and what peace looks like from the international perspective. And in this case, I mean, in 2015, the forces who were fighting the Houthis were much more fragmented, much more basically unequipped, untrained, and basically they had to rely on remnants, really, of what left of a very, very weakened and defeated Yemeni army to reposition, remobilize, and then fight back the Houthis. But the main difference is that there was a clear political will and political decision to fight back, to push on the Houthis, added with huge regional support, specifically coming from Saudi Arabia and, of course, the UAE. And this is what is lacking, and what's lacking, especially at this moment. In 2018, if there was any lesson from the Stockholm Agreement, is that you can you might be ready on the ground, you can win the military battle, but the political calculus could actually give you a huge political blow, a huge political defeat. And this is what happened in 2018. And the shadows of what happened, the echoes of what happened in 2018 is still affecting the decision-making locally. There is a lot of hesitance from many Yemeni commanders when you speak to them because of that experience of 2018. It takes a lot of manpower, a lot of effort, a lot of political clout, a lot of resources to mobilize forces on the ground. But if you don't have the political go-ahead, it will be very exhausting to keep that momentum going on for quite a long time. Now, when things started with the Biden administration, and I want to compare the situation right now compared to how it was back then. Locally, there was some form of relief because even Biden wasn't, I would say, as decisive and maybe serious to push all the way against the Houthis, but it marked the beginning of the shift of how the US viewed its relationship and approach towards the Houthis. And that was very important for the local forces because the last thing they want to do is they're fighting against the Houthis locally, but also fighting the international community in terms its approach towards peace in Yemen. So that beginning of shift from the Biden administration was form of a relief to the local forces, and then there's that sense of maybe now it's a good idea to start prepping especially at the west coast of Yemen. The level of readiness is high up. It's much more than it was before. People are feeling that the momentum might come at some time, but of course, as Mike just said, the go-ahead, especially from regional allies to Yemen, is still not there. And the forces on the ground will not act by themselves if they're not fully coordinating, especially with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And then there's another question, another dynamic: are the Saudis and the UAE on the same page when it comes to how they approach the Houthis? Because that affects the local dynamics. Forces do appear coordinating and communicating on the ground, but effectively they are communicating either with the Saudis or with the Emiratis, and that affects the local dynamics quite significantly. And the final thing is the approach, the current approach of the Trump administration. Now there is a shift. There's a significant shift from Biden. And that again gives another form of signs and signals to the local forces, but they don't feel that the U.S. is fully there. Again, the main problem has always been this gap between what the international community view Yemen and how the locals and the Yemenis view the solution to the Yemeni crisis. Until today, the problem of the Houthis is still viewed as a Red Sea problem, as a maritime problem. But at its origin, it's a land problem. If you don't tackle the main issue, which is what Mike clearly mentioned, they fear loss of terrain more than anything else. And if you don't tackle that quite head on, you're always going to have a threat at the Red Sea, no matter how much and how many times you're going to bomb them. A military war is not won by an air campaign. I would like to end the note by I was heavily supportive of the FTO designation, not because the FTO designation does end the Houthi crisis, but because it puts quite a realism on how the international community should approach the Houthi problem from the beginning. If the strategic aim is to weaken the Houthis and gain a unified structure within the Yemeni government, then you should be working towards draining their resources and aiming to weaken them, even at the long run. But the approach had always been, unfortunately, from the international community, is that they have not appreciated what is the threat, what is the real threat of the Houthis locally, regionally, and internationally. And I think they're still not fully there yet.
Thank you very much, but I tackled actually my next question as well. What you're saying, if I may paraphrase, that the international community if I understood correctly, must redefine what the Houthis are. Are they a strategic threat to international peace, trade, and security, but also sources of stability and peace in Yemen? Or are they contributing actors to the escalation and peace? And based on that, work backwards. And what you think is that the Biden administration did not do justice to that definition. Trump with the FTO designation, a calibration of the US approach, especially with the FTO, did pave a way to weaken the Houthis also in the financial logistical terms. In a few sentences, if you may, what other important things that the FTO, in what ways should the FTO be leveraged further? What are the important files that are key in that endeavor?
Well, the many files, but the what I would say is this: the FTO by itself is not a final solution. It is not the solution to the Houthi crisis in Yemen, and I view it as a crisis. At the end of the day, you do have a militant group that doesn't view Yemen in terms of its asset to its own citizens, but as how they can leverage Yemen to threaten the international community. But the problem had always been, what is the alternative? Is just to leave the Houthis with access to financial revenues, to fuel, to communication, to getting income from telecom, unaffected? That is a problem. If there is no pressure put on them on the long run, they are going to be a bigger threat than they are today. And not tackling the Houthis effectively back in 2018 led to them to being a crisis today. And if any delay, I would say, from the international community to appreciate the damage it's doing to Yemen internally, then of course it's going to cause more problems in the future. We live in a very interconnected global environment. You cannot just isolate one group, one geography, and pretend that the problem is not there.
Thank you very much. That was sort of a comprehensive big picture answer. If I may zoom in again into regional dynamics with Dr. Hisham, Riyadh continues to watch the evolving landscape with strategic caution, having had Chinese brokered rapprochement with Iran, and these have been, cautiously deepening. But the decision is for Riyadh, as far as I understand, is strategic. And despite the progress made and the weakening of Axis with the fall of Assad and the sort of weakening of Hezbollah in Lebanon, we continue to see perhaps the Houthis spearheading much of the sources of insecurity within the Gulf's immediate vicinity. We see that much less in Iraq with the PMF. They're more pragmatic, possibly. And last July, perhaps this is one of the interesting episodes, we saw the Houthi rebels resume sporadic threatening of cross-border attacks into Riyadh using a Yemeni file. In a way, this is a new development. So it's no longer peace for peace. It's more now, the formula is changing. Pressure for continuation of this truce or sort of positive or this positive development, call it peace or de-escalation or anything. My question from Riyadh's perspective, how does it see all of this evolving landscape in Yemen, US operations and all of that? And what drives this decision?
Thank you, Ibrahim. What I can say on the strategic level, and I'm not sharing a secret here when I say that the Saudi intervention in Yemen has been very costly on every sense. Riyadh calculus has shifted across the years, driven, in my opinion, by two key factors. The first, as you mentioned, are domestic needs, internal stability, and also the influence of China, regional deal with Iran. And when I say domestic needs, I mean that the kingdom, regardless of its trust or the way it views Ansar Allah or the Houthis, it seeks to avoid disruption to its giga projects or economy. However, I have to confess that it would be very hard to disagree with anyone saying that Saudi Arabia implicitly supports the US campaign against the Houthis. But in my opinion, which is I think closer to reality, that the Saudis is concerned on how the whole matter will end. The public, not sure if we can call it the official position because it could be different, but the public position at least is more cautious and of course more diplomatic, even if there is an implicit acceptance of the strikes as means of pressuring the Houthis without direct Saudi involvement. And I mean that the US military strikes, such as Operation Rough Rider, could help weakening the Houthis, which would, at least in theory, could push for a broader solution in Yemen. But the kingdom approaches the whole issue with cautiousness, as it's much more complicated. As we have seen just yesterday when the Houthis targeted Israel main airport, despite what the Houthis have been going through in the last few months. Last year, Riyadh also decision not to join the US-led Operation Prosperity Guardian reflects lessons from past interventions and the desire to avoid being involved in US-Iran tensions. And I'm seeing continuation on the same path of Saudi disengagement, because there is also a serious and a very legitimate concern that could make Houthis stronger by stirring up anger against the Israelis and Americans. And Saudi Arabia, at least until now, says it's not part of any talks for a ground attack and wants to keep things stable to protect its economy. And this seems a very rational and justified position at the current moment. Let me clarify what I'm saying. The Houthi resilience makes victory tough, as we have seen in the near past, whether it's 2018 or pre-COVID. Trump May 13 visit could shift or clarify things, but I doubt it. But when it comes to ground offensive, things are not clear. But Saudi Arabia rejects the offensive without a firm truce or a solid deal. Until now, I have to disagree with you slightly here. The 2022 ceasefire has worked for a great extent and worked well for the Saudis. And the Saudis do not want to lose this or swap it for a very ambiguous, until now, roadmap. We hear also that the Saudis, these are still rumors, have urged Trump to hold off support to the so-called ground offensive. And on April 16, Saudi, at least officially, denied the existence of any attack plans, simply because Houthi retaliation could hit Saudi oil sites. And also because a fear of humanitarian disaster. Disrupting Hodeida 80% of, Barak could correct me on this, of Yemen's supply, and for practical reasons. Such conditions will make the kingdom efforts in Yemen very difficult, as we have seen in the near past. Also, when it comes to also the UAE-backed separatists, this also might weaken the Yemeni government, which will marginalize also the kingdom influence. I'll leave it here and I'll come to some of these points later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hisham. So you pinpointed a number of important points internally: socioeconomic priorities, internal stability, but also perhaps some of the benefits that came with the truce as a strategic necessity in 2022. But that does not eliminate perhaps the manifestations of vulnerability and the threat. And there has been also the reflection that the American foreign policy towards the region and the Yemen file has been inconsistent.
Yes.
How does that affect the Saudi calculus today after Abqaiq and Khalid, especially under the first, Trump administration, and now that he's coming with all of this changing landscape? Riyadh has perhaps benefited so much to approach more on de-escalation mechanisms and diplomacy more than direct military confrontation. So how does that fit? Where does that go?
In few short sentences, in a nutshell, I don't think it will be a game changer on the Houthi matter. I mean, Trump's visit to the kingdom. It will mainly focus on investment deals and working together on security. The Houthi subject is included, and also Gaza. But the visit will likely bring some business deals and will try to distance the GCC as a whole from China. But I'm not seeing any turning points when it comes to Yemen during this visit. I mean, it could happen, but I'm not seeing this.
Very, very good insight. And that makes perhaps Trump's visit more focused on significant bilateral trade, coordination, regional files. So what we're expecting is far less on the Houthis themselves in Yemen.
Yeah, the whole GCC pivot, the so-called pivot to Asia, I mean, will be on the top of the list. I'm not seeing Yemen there on the list, despite what we hear and here and there in the media. But I'm not seeing Yemen as an urgency for Trump's, agenda in Riyadh.
Thank you. But had touched perhaps a number of points on how regional Gulf states view the evolving landscape in Yemen. Any comment on that note at all, if any? Okay. So in terms of the focus, now that we've spoken about a number of things, the US operations, the ground offensive, a part of the regional calculus, very delighted to bring with us to the discussion now, Yasmin Iryani. You've heard sort of different angles of the discussion on the fluid regional calculus, sort of the inconsistent Yemen policy on Yemen, but also the disconnect from Red Sea developments, and perhaps tapping on the latest redefinition of the Houthis as sort of a challenge that undermines regional peace, specifically trade as well and security. And just yesterday, we had a new incoming prime minister, which paves possibly a way to improve cohesion and unity within the ranks of the government of Yemen. Based on that, and Barak had brought an important point about the wide gap between international communities' vision of what they call peace and the internal requirements of peace in Yemen. The internal imbalance of power has been dragging for a long time, and it has reaffirmed that the war in Yemen is unfinished, and it's unlikely to be so through possibly any de-escalation or a quick fix. What are the conditions that are essential for an inclusive, sustainable peace process in Yemen, having seen stalled peace process and the state of imbalance overall? Is there a recipe, though no magic recipe exists, but some requirements that would you think, reflecting on the past 1 decade and the latest international interventions? I'm very eager to hear your perspective on that, Yasmin.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim, and thanks for having me. I mean, there is no magic bullet, as you said, and peace is becoming harder and harder, and the situation is more complex. We are in a more difficult situation now than 10 years ago. And as you said, and as well Barak mentioned, is that the asymmetry of power has created a situation where you didn't really have any meaningful peace negotiations, almost maybe at very few moments during the last 10 years. Perhaps the Kuwait talks, and maybe after the Marib battle with the 2022 truce. And it was it was a result of a changing context on the ground. So we had a very difficult battle for almost a year in Marib that brought the parties to the negotiating table on terms that could have been, that the negotiators were able to compromise. This transformative moment, and I mean, I cannot even call this a transformative moment. It was a moment where you had an opportunity, but there have been very few of these moments, and partly it has to do with the design of, or our approach to peace, the approach of the UN as part, but also other mediators, that has for 10 years, I believe, entrenched the power of one of the parties and continue to see the weakening of, or to observe the weakening of the other parties and not do anything about it. So this situation created basically a very complex prospects for peace, or diminished the prospects for peace in a very fundamental way. And I think it's an example of how diplomacy can, can reach a situation where you have a worse context in terms of peace. This doesn't say that diplomacy should be thrown out the window. On the contrary, and I am afraid that some are thinking that no more diplomacy, we are done with the talks, and let's think about military track. And I think that's also a mistake. Diplomacy done right, with sensitivity to symmetries of power, will be very effective. But unfortunately, it was lacking in the Yemeni context. And I think many Yemeni observers have been pointing this out for a long time. And we have also another problem, is that the approach to peace focused a lot on inclusion, which of course is important, but almost disregarded the importance of leverage. So again, for many years, the focus was about bringing the Houthis to the negotiating table, but there was not much effort done with regard to increasing leverage on the various conflict parties, including the Houthis. So this is where we're at now, after 10 years. And the reaction to this, particularly, I believe, from the US, but we also see it to different extents from other Western governments, is that maybe this diplomatic track was pointless. Let's focus on a military track. And the focus on military track, with the way that the US is designing its calculus in the region, particularly now with the Trump administration, means that the US does not have a long bandwidth, not in Yemen, not so much in the region. This means that they would have to compartmentalize the Yemen problem. I think Barat was referring a little bit to this, is that the objective is basically degrade Houthi capabilities and ensure that they're not able to reconstitute them. This is the declared objective. And it's focusing on the Red Sea security and the freedom of navigation. But we know that you cannot separate the files, and you cannot think of this as, one issue isolated that can be tackled, and that will solve everything. That will solve Houthi capabilities from reaching the Gulf or Israel, because I think that's not going to happen. As simple as that. I think it's one can say even delusional, because what's on the ground is basically, we know the US does not want to get involved on the long term. It has other priorities. The Red Sea crisis is connected to other crises in the region and connected to regional dynamics as well. And the Houthis' objectives, their ambitions in Yemen and in the region. So I believe that separating these files is not going to be at all effective, and I don't think it will be successful. And we have a lot of historic precedents of such attempts that end up in a failure, which risks actually drawing the U.S. into this conflict for long term. And not only this, but also with the discussions that are happening now about potential military ground operation that, as speakers mentioned, is very ambiguous, then you risk also several unintended consequences of this of the strategy, which is based on a military track or focusing on a military track. I don't think there's enough thinking to consider what these unintentional consequences are. Of course, there are other actors in Yemen, and there are multiple spoilers, and we need to think about the different possibilities. If the Houthis are weakened but not completely degraded, then they will come back stronger. Of course, they use every time there is an attack against them, especially from the US, as PR content that's quite effective in the region. Maybe less so in Yemen, but also it is effective in Yemen because it shows that, or they can say that they have been able to confront world powers and come out as winners or victorious. So that's one risk. Another risk is that if they are degraded to an extent where you have a moment of complete political vacuum, then you don't know what happens if there's no thinking there about what's going to happen, if there's no plan, if there's no strategy. So I think there is a combination of factors here that indicate that we are facing multiple risks if the approach is not comprehensive. And my fear is that the U.S. has been investing in a diplomatic track for a long time with the U.S. envoy dedicated to the file. Now it looks like they are not so interested in that anymore. They want to hit the Houthis and get out and focus on other things. And I don't think that's going to be possible. I mean, anything can happen, of course, everything is on the table, but there are also factors on the ground that we can follow. So there are, as I said, high risks, and also we know what Dr. Hashim mentioned is the calculus of the Gulf states is basically, I don't believe that they're ready to go back into an escalation with Iran. The risks are very high for Saudi Arabia now to enter a new confrontation, and especially that it doesn't want to see itself in the same position that it was cornered at some point. And I think the Americans are also aware of this, and they are trying to reset their relationship, and they have been trying to do that for a long time. So you need these, you need the Gulf states, you need Saudi Arabia, you need the US, and you need the West in general, and the UN to be somewhat aligned in terms of what should happen for a peace process to happen. And that should be also aligned with the ambitions and the aspirations of Yemenis, which, as Bara mentioned as well, is that it's lacking. I mean, for a long time, the peace process was, I would say, tone deaf to what Yemenis were saying, and we see now the results of this. So, I mean, I still think that there are opportunities, but somehow we don't miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and that's a problem. But I think that there are still opportunities within this situation, just because it is very fluid, and different parties are recalibrating their calculations, and this means that you can find entry points if there is strategic thinking. Whether these opportunities will be taken advantage of or not, I am not sure, but I'm happy to talk more about what they could be.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. You touched indeed about several important points, sensitive diplomacy. You also pinpointed a number of points on the necessity of sort of having a functional military track, but also long-term commitment of the international community. And you pinpointed the lack of strategy by this very Trump administration, which marks a continuation of possibly the inconsistent US policy making. I'm aware about the time. We have about 10 minutes left, and I have a few questions left in if we don't have any Q&A from anywhere. One of the questions is, as you were talking, and quickly, if perhaps you can come back to, let me go back to Hisham quickly on a regional question point on Saudi UAE calculus. How aligned are they? If you have some comments on those, be very happy to hear, and then we'll circle back with questions to each one of you.
If you allow me, on the ground offensive, the 80,000 troops claims seems inflated. But anyways, what I can say that it's a fair argument to say that it's not just about Hodeida, it's about Gulf rivalries in Yemen. The Saudis and the Emiratis are not on the same page for a simple reason, because they want different things. These are two different states, and we always confuse them together. Riyadh wants peace or some sort of stability in Yemen to protect its economy, because anything happening in Yemen affects Saudi more than any other state in the region. This is the same. This is not the same with the UAE. The UAE wants to control of ports, and the UAE, it's not a secret to say that the UAE provides logistical and political support to anti-Houthi proxies such as the STC and al-Amalika, the giant brigades. But if I want to capture the whole a snapshot of the whole scene, I would say the main factor here is the Houthi resilience, backed by Iran. Even if Iran keeps denying it, as it did recently, makes a quick win unlikely, as we have seen in 2018 failed defensive. So the only path forward for Riyadh is, in my opinion, is to work with the US and also with the Emiratis, because I think the Emiratis are a very important actor, to empower the very fractured Yemeni international recognized government by various means. To make it a functional government with less corruption. I mean, this would help in finding a political solution at the end. But as Yasmin said, having a magic bullet, I'm not seeing this. I'm not seeing this anywhere close. And I'm not optimistic and expecting that we would see a dramatic change in the few coming weeks or months.
Thank you very much. You captured some interesting points about Gulf politics in Yemen, and indeed some of the caveats that come with it. And you mentioned an important point about perhaps the fragility of the Yemeni government. And I want to move quickly to Bara on that note. Bara, often when we speak with diplomats and the international community as researchers and observers of the Yemen file, that point can be overlooked in many ways. And yesterday, the new prime minister was appointed. The former prime minister perhaps had the most notable sort of, internalized conflicts within the government itself. The cabinet has not convened for a long time in show of resistance. And that's just at the government level, without the necessity to have active coordination between the armed, formations that are under the helm of the government of Yemen. Is enhancing coordination, alignment of objectives, and being presented as a reliable partner internationally to stabilize Yemen, and as a result stabilize the immediate vicinity, especially in the maritime domain possible, and what needs to be done with a new prime minister coming now? You're on mute.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I think again there is no magic bullet. Those many issues that you raised are because of an accumulation of problems that have came from 2015, and eventually you have the many issues. But let me be very quick. First of all, the government needs revenues. If it's unable to sell oil and start benefiting from gaining access to ports, there's no one person, one prime minister that come and just can resolve the problem. It needs urgent financial assistance from Yemen neighbors, specifically Saudi Arabia, mainly because that was the commitment they made in 2022 when there was this change in the presidential leadership from President Hadi to a presidential council. And third, and very importantly, a government needs a monopoly over power. If it's unable to get access to building its military capacity and strengthening its security structure, you're going to have a fractured and divisions within the same government. At the end of the day, it needs a monopoly over power. And then and finally, all of these are distracting from the main problem, which is basically the Houthis. There is no problem whatsoever, even if you continued on the long run, without tackling the Houthi problem. They will continue attacking your oil facilities. They will continue attacking ports. They even attacked Aden Airport. That problem needs to be dealt with seriously. So yeah, that's and I don't want to take all the time, but these are quick remarks.
Thank you very much. You touched on the importance of oil exports and Saudi Emirati, possibly American support would be necessary to secure these facilities, I believe. Just quickly, Mike, you mentioned the Houthis have been downing many drones, over 20 by many count. What are the strategic headlines that they're trying to test here, and what deterrence options are possible? Maybe under a minute, please.
Well, when you're trying to blind the US, particularly when it comes to leadership targeting and getting a close look at Houthi capabilities on the ground, and that's what they've very effectively done now. Between 21 and 26 major US drone systems knocked down. So they're trying to roll us back and push us out of the environment, which is an impressive achievement if they can do it. It's not something the US seems to be willing to allow them to do. I think that's why we started the escalation around mid-March, is because of the aggressive Houthi measures to roll back our intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance.
Thank you very much. That's a sharp and concise answer. Yasmin, if I may end with you. Yesterday, the Houthis launched an attack on Israel, and we've seen that the first civilian attack was in the last 2 years was not by the US, it was by Israel. What to expect? That's one. And two, the US has spent over $1 billion reportedly. If this continues as an open confrontation, what is the necessary path forward? Yemenis have paid a long cost over the past 14, 15 years. Is there an end to this cost, or a cost that puts an end to all the costs that may continue?
That's a combined question. I think there's no shortcut to fixing the Yemen problem. There was no shortcut at the beginning, and now definitely not, because the situation is a lot more complex. The Houthis are much stronger than they are when they were when they started, and also in the last couple of years they were able to use their weapons in real-life scenarios. This gives them a very strategic advancement compared to their rivals. So absolutely, there's no shortcut to Yemen. It's never going to be a quick fix. It's never going to be, we're going to do this and get out. That's never going to happen. There was also no shortcut with peace processes, with quick fixes, and it's really essential. And I think that's what we try to do at Sana'a Center, is to really understand Yemen with its complexity and its joint, its environment, common interests with other, but also the lack of common interests with others in the region, which is part of the problem sometimes. So I think that it's important for anyone who wants to really change the situation to think about it more strategically, more comprehensively, and to understand the Yemen at the local level and regional level and the dynamics in between.
Thank you very much. And with this note, there is no shortcut, but a long way that must be taken to address the sources of instability in Yemen and the Red Sea. Nothing is easy. Thank you to our panelists for their insightful and open contributions, and to our audience for joining us. Today's discussion underscored the complexity of Yemen's moment, the current moment of which perhaps many Yemeni hopes are resurfacing again to the fore after being overshadowed by a decade of stalled peace processes, but also unfinished military business. The voices of Yemenis on the ground at a moment of sort of regional realignment and increasing international attention to Yemen might continue in the near term, but the country's many challenges will continue to proliferate if there is no committed strategy by Yemenis and their international partners and stakeholders. On behalf of the Malcolm H. Carnegie Middle East Center, we appreciate your engagement and look forward to future conversations. And with that, thank you very much, and until the next one.